Hey everyone, and thanks for joining me in another session. Today we'll be exploring some essential negotiating phrases that will help you sound more confident, professional, and natural in any business discussion. This is one topic that lots of my students have told me they struggle with, so let's dive right in. I've categorized the phrases into those expressing flexibility and willingness, setting limits, uncertainty, opening the discussion, reaching agreement, and using strategy. So, first, let's explore those phrases we often use when we talk about flexibility, willingness, making compromise. Of course, you can always use the verb compromise or the phrase to make a compromise. But here we can see some more advanced phrases that we still use on a day-to-day basis. You might know the phrase to meet somebody halfway. Make sure there is no L in halfway, in either British or American version. Well, the American version would be halfway, but there is no L in the pronunciation. Side note. So this means to compromise. For example, we are happy to meet them halfway on the delivery schedule. We can also use give and take as a noun, mind you. This is a mutual compromise and cooperation. For example, we can say there's always a bit of give and take when aligning priorities in a meeting. You see, there's always a little bit of, or always a bit of give and take. We use it as a noun, and this is something to keep in mind because I sometimes hear people use it as a verb, which is not the case. To split the difference is another very common phrase we use when we talk about numbers. So this means to agree on a number exactly between two positions. For example, you won £6,000, we won £4,000. Let's split the difference and settle on £5,000. So you see that this means finding the sweet spot. The sweet spot is the phrase that I have included as well, but we'll come to it in a bit. So this is the number exactly between. Um, to settle on is another great phrasal verb, which means to agree on something. There's more when it comes to flexibility and willingness. Give ground means to concede or adjust your position to end the argument. Concede, by the way, is a pretty formal verb, meaning to agree to something often unwillingly. And you might know the noun concession, which means the act of agreeing to something or allowing somebody to do something, especially in order to end an argument or disagreement. So this is also a good word to keep in mind. For example, we might need to give ground if we want to secure this deal. Wiggle room is a really fantastic phrase I want you to keep on your radar. This implies flexibility or space to make some adjustment. For example, is there any wiggle room or is this your final offer? We can also say there is only a little bit of wiggle room. So only a little bit room space. In this case, a room actually means space. So it's not a room like a bathroom or a living room. So it means space to do something. And finally, in this category, we've got an awesome phrasal verb to iron something out. I say iron. In American English, it's iron, in case you were wondering. This means to resolve small issues or details. We have a very similar expression in Serbian, I believe. So, you know, when there are some small issues to be fixed, we just iron them out. For example, let's iron out the remaining details before we finalize the agreement. Just like with other separable transitive verbs, we can iron something out or we can iron out something. However, in the case of a pronoun, if that something is a pronoun it or them, it has to go in between iron and out. Let's iron them out. This is also the case with many other phrasal verbs that are separable, such as if you remember push back the meeting, we can say push back the meeting, push the meeting back, or push it back, but not push back it. Lots of phrasal verbs work like this. And sometimes the power is in what you don't allow. Now, let's talk about setting limits. We talked about the phrase to give ground, and the opposite is to stand your ground, which means to refuse to change your position despite difficulties. For example, I stood my ground when they tried to push back the deadline again. You see, I said push back the deadline, but what it says here is push the deadline back. Both are possible. So, circling back to what I've told you, you can push the deadline back, push back the deadline, but we can only push it back. So, the pronoun goes in between. Let's continue with our setting limits phrases. To stick to your guns. If you stick to your guns, it means that you maintain your position very firmly. So these two expressions, to stand your ground and stick to your guns, are very similar and they can be used interchangeably depending on the situation. Well, most of the time they can be used interchangeably. Let's take a look at this example sentence. They stuck to their guns and refused to lower the monthly fee. The last one here is to draw the line. It means to set a clear, firm limit. For instance, we need to draw the line at working weekends. It's not sustainable. This means that the person who has said this is not willing to work at the weekends. And now let's see how we can discuss uncertainty. Sometimes it's a very good idea to know how to buy our time. For example, we can say that we are on the fence. This means that we are unable to decide or that we are hesitant. So we, people, are on the fence. For example, a few board members are still on the fence about switching suppliers. While people are on the fence, we say that something is up in the air, something such as a project, for example, or a renewal date. For instance, the renewal date is still up in the air. Let's wait for the legal team to confirm. This means still undecided or unconfirmed. The next one is another awfully common idiom. It's not to be set in stone. This means if something is not set in stone, such as the date, time, or price, it means it's not fixed or unchangeable. Let's take this sentence as an example. The price is not set in stone. We're open to discussion if the volume increases. Here is something that I also wanted you to pay attention to be open to discussion. We say open to plus noun. So if instead of a noun, we need to use a verb, the verb needs to be in the ing form. So open to discussing, for example. The noun is often replaced by an ing form, but rarely by a verb. Keep that in mind. Sometimes when my students see to, they just assume that what follows is a verb, an infinitive form, but this is not always the case. Now let's move on to opening the discussion. This phrasal verb means to suggest and it's to put forward. To put forward means to present or propose or suggest something. We often put forward suggestions, ideas, proposals. For instance, we'd like to put forward a revised pricing model for next quarter. This means to suggest a revised pricing model. The next phrase is a widely used one, but quite honestly, I think all of these are widely used. You can't go wrong with any of these. Just keep them up your sleeve. Anyway, the ball is in your court means it's your turn to respond or act. For example, we've submitted our final draft. The ball is in your court now. It means now it's up to you to make the next move. The last phrase here is on the table. If something is on the table, it means it's available for discussion. For instance, we can say all proposed changes are now back on the table for final review. We often say that offers are on the table. So we're waiting for the person we are negotiating with to either accept it or decline it. Moving on to reaching agreements. We can use the noun deal with various verbs. So let's take a look at these three, which are really, really widely used. To strike a deal means to make a successful agreement. Strike in the past is struck. So we say strike, struck, struck, or stricken. We struck a deal after several rounds of negotiation. We can also seal the deal, and this means to confirm or finalize an agreement, usually by signing, accepting, or formally committing to it. We seal the deal with a handshake and a signed contract. To clinch the deal means to successfully win or secure an agreement, often after effort or persuasion. So you see that the three verbs are very similar, but they have slight nuances in how they are used. For example, as for clinching the deal, we can say extending the support period helped us clinch the deal. So let me break this down a bit further because these three verbs are often confused. Striking a deal is about reaching agreement, typically in conversation or negotiation, and it's the most neutral of the three. To seal the deal is what happens once the agreement is made official. That's why we put signed, confirmed, locked in. Lock in is a great expression. It means secure. So secure a deal. And clinch the deal carries a tone of success. So it suggests that something difficult or competitive is finally over. So yes, they are similar, but using the different one adds nuance and confidence to your speech. And finally, strategy. These phrases are for when you need to position your value or negotiate cleverly. Sweet spot is the phrase that I've used previously. This is the ideal middle point. It's quite self-explanatory, really. We need to find the sweet spot between cost and delivery speed. Another really common one is a trump card. It's very easy to remember because of the president, I suppose. And what it means is a strong hidden advantage. For instance, their wide distribution network was their trump card in the negotiation. Now, you know the following two phrasal verbs. One is to step in, to intervene or get involved in order to help somebody, for example. The legal team had to step in when things got too complex. And finally, knock off. To knock off means to reduce a price. They agreed to knock 30% off the asking price to close quickly. And the asking price is the price at which something is offered for sale. And with that, I'd like to wrap this up and remind you to try and use at least a few of these lovely negotiating phrases in your next negotiation. Thank you for tuning in and looking forward to seeing you next time. Have a great one.